Hi friends, it's Michelle Pegler of Gingy Makes Quilts. Today I have a short video for you about labeling your quilt. I think labeling your quilt is really important so that there's always a record of who made it and when. And for me, I want to make sure that the quilt label is going to last a long time. So I'm going to show you my whole process, all the materials I use, and how I get it on there. So let's get started. First, I want to show you a quilt label that I made a couple years ago on a quilt that has been used and washed a lot, which is this Carly quilt pattern I made. So this is generally how I make my labels. I like to make it about 4 inches by 3 inches, which is a good size. It's about the size of the palm of my hand, to be able to write some things on there. I use a gel roller fabric pen to write on a piece of fabric. And the things that I usually like to include are when I made it. So this says spring 2022. And then I always put the care instructions on here too, so that if I gift this quilt to somebody or it gets passed down through the generations, they don't have to try and remember every time when they put it in the washer how it should be washed. It's always on here for reference. So it says machine wash, delicate on cold, tumble dry on low. And to be honest, I sometimes don't even do the delicate setting, but washing on cold and then tumble drying on low is the most important part there. The other thing I have on here is a little label. So I got these pre-printed iron-on labels by, I ordered them from Ever Emblem, where you can design a little label. I think I ordered 50 or 100 at a time. I'll show you how I put these on in a minute. So that goes right here. I also put the name of the quilt on here, the name of the quilt pattern. And then what I want you to notice as well is this has been washed a lot, but because it is stitched down around the outside and the individual little iron-on label is also stitched down, and then it's quilted over as well. So the quilting goes through the label. This thing is never coming off. Someone would have to work really hard to get this thing off here. And even after all of the washing, you can see that these words are still readable. So this pen really does work. And I think, you could always go back and add another layer of the pen to make it even darker. So to get started, what I do is I find a scrap piece of light color fabric. Sometimes it's white, sometimes it's cream. Doesn't really matter as long as you can write on it and it'll show up really well. So I cut this scrap. It's about 6 inches by 5 inches or whatever. I'm going to go ahead and start the label. All right, so I've got my piece of fabric here. I'm going to go ahead and just press it flat. With my pre-printed label here, I'm going to peel off the backing sticker piece. And then I'm going to decide where I want to place it. So normally I like to place it kind of near the top left. Doesn't really matter. This does not need to be exact. I like to leave at least an inch on the left and the top because we are going to go and iron under those edges so that there's no raw edges left around the whole rectangle. So this is a good spot for me. All you have to do is press it for 3 seconds with a dry hot iron. So I've turned the steam off my iron. I'm just going to press it for 3 seconds and then it is adhered. So I've made a couple of quilts where that's all I did. I just pressed it on and then I stitched my label to the back of my quilt. But over time, this edge does start peeling up as you wash it. So now I like to do a blanket stitch around this edge as well. And I'll show you that in a few steps. So the next step I do is I square up my scrap fabric. I'm going to align my ruler with the label now and make sure I have a perfect right angle compared to that on all sides. So I am going to have a full inch on both of these sides. And then I'm going to flip this around and decide how big I want it. So I can do, maybe I'll do 6 inches by 4.5 inches. And again, it does not matter a particular size. I'm just going for enough space to be able to write my instructions on here after I go iron under all the raw edges. So let's go do that. All right, so this is the next step in the process where we need to iron under all these edges so that they won't fray over time. I got a tool that helps with this. It's the Clover Hot Hem Ruler. So it has lines on here for, 1/4 and 1/2 inches. I don't really worry about measuring exactly. I do it by eye and I try to get somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. So I'll show you how I do that. I flip this over, lay this on one side, and I have turned my steam back on my iron so that this can really stick good. So we're gonna just kind of get the iron edge under that edge. I hold it on there for a few seconds. Then I take this away and I press it down again to try and hold it down even better. Now it's never gonna be perfect until we get to the glue part. So then I flip it around, do this other edge, being careful not to burn my fingers. All right, now this is the tricky part because these corners are not going to want to stay down on these other sides. So what I do is I iron it first, then I come in here and put a little dot of glue underneath each corner, and then fold it over and iron it again down. So I'll show you that. Okay. And you really don't need very much. This is just clear washable Elmer's glue. Can you see that? Clear washable Elmer's glue. So I come in here and I put a dot. I'm not sure if you're gonna be able to see that on the video, but there's just a dot of glue there, and I'm gonna push this down and then iron it again to try and hold it down. So see, it sticks pretty good. All right, so that's done. Now I'm gonna go do the other side. Since this is washable glue, you don't really have to worry about getting it on stuff. I do try to keep it under the fabric though and not get any on my iron. But if you did get it on your iron, it would wash off. Okay, so those are all glued down now. This is the point at which I'm going to write out anything I want to write on here now that I have the finished size. Since I'm going to be doing a blanket stitch around the edge to put it onto my backing, I make sure not to write too close to the edge, but you've got a lot of space on here. If you want to write the care instructions, you want to write a little note to who the quilt is for or why you made it, name of the pattern, name of the fabrics, anything you want to put on here, you can put on here. All right, so the next step, once you've got everything on your label that you like, is to pin it onto your backing fabric. So I'm using this vibrant orange on the back of my undersea quilt, and I've laid out one of the corners of it onto my cutting table so I can do some measuring. This is going to be going on my long arm, so if you are quilting yours on a long arm or you're sending it to a long armer, you need to remember that they need space on the edge of the side to pin your fabric to the machine, and then there's also going to be some space you probably want to the side of your binding. So you don't want to put this way over here because that is going to get trimmed off or it's not going to get quilted or you're going to lose part of it. You want to make sure to give enough space on both the side and below your label for all the quilting to happen and then all of the excess to get trimmed off. So what I normally do is I get my 10.5 square ruler, and I like to measure quite a ways in from the side edge. Like I will probably go ahead and do 8 inches or so. And another thing to think about is, this cut edge from the fabric that you had that you're using for your backing might not be perfectly square. So you want to give it a little bit of extra room for any sort of squaring up or trimming. All right, so that's about 8 inches from the cut edge on the side. And then the bottom edge can be a bit closer, but remember, you got to leave that excess space for, the quilting to go off the edge of the quilt top, and then you're going to trim it, and then you're going to put a binding. So give it some room to breathe. I will probably give it about 5 or 6 inches on the bottom here too. I think I'll go a little bit further up. And then I'm just going to make sure that it's squared up to the bottom and the side. So I can kind of push it against my ruler there until it's how I like it. All right, so I like that spot. Now I'm just going to take a couple pins and pin it to that spot so that I can go and sew it down. So pin there, and another pin to here. Now we will sew this on. All right, there are lots of different stitches you could use to attach your label to your backing. I use this style, which I believe is called a blanket stitch, and you could definitely do a zigzag or something else, but that's just what I pick. So I like to reduce the stitch length a little bit because it's going to default to a pretty wide back and forth. I put this down at a 2.5, and then I reduce the distance it's going to go each step as well. So this is the settings I do, and I have finagled the big part of the quilt under the throat space. This is a little tricky if you don't have very much throat space if you have a really big backing, but I'm sure you can manage. So I will get going on this. You want to make sure to put a foot on here that has space for it to go back and forth. Don't just use a foot that has a single hole. So I like to do just one back stitch at the start, and then I'm going to go ahead and start going around. So blanket stitch is 2 forward and 1 to the side. I'm just trying to feed this in here evenly, quilt back and the label. I could use my walking foot for this. Sometimes I do. I'm not doing that right now. Cuddle fabric is pretty stretchy, so I'm just trying to make sure it's not really stretching in any direction. Another thing is I'm using a cream color thread that's going to blend really nicely with this cream color fabric. I've gotten to my first corner here, and I need to turn it this way. What I found is sometimes it's easier to rotate it the long way around when it's a matter of trying to get the whole quilt backing through the throat space. I like to go around this way instead as I turn that corner. All right, I've done 2 sides. At this point, I usually decide to take the pins out since it's secured on 2 sides. Now I can kind of just keep it flat with my hand as I'm finishing up those other sides, and I will show you what it looks like when it's done. Okay, I have reached the point where I had started, so I'm going to go ahead and do a couple back stitches and call it good. So here's what it looks like. Oh, my thread cutter didn't quite get that, but here's what it looks like. And you can see that I caught the edge all the way around really nicely. So now I'm going to go around one more time and blanket stitch around this iron-on label again so that it doesn't peel away over time. And at that point, I will be all ready to load this on my long arm and start quilting.